Hello, this is Christina Wallace, and today I'm going to show you how to make this filler flower. Filler flower, as you know, if you watched my channel for a while, is not something I do a lot of, so I am really quite interested how it's going to turn out. So I hope you enjoy this very long video, and yeah, let's go. Hopefully I'm not going to bore you to death with it. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to cut enough middles for the individual flowers, and I would say that for a middle crown like this one, we would need about 30 to 40 middles, wire gauge 26 or 28. And so now you have all your centers. You would need to make little hooks at the end of each wire. Onto these hooks you will be placing a teardrop shapes of clay, which will eventually become the very centers of the small flowers. So these small hooks is just a good practice to help your centers to stay there put. With cold porcelain you may get away without them, with gum paste you absolutely couldn't, it would just slip off. So what's next? This is a dust I'm going to use to add a little bit of color to the middles, because I think it would work better than paint in this case. That one is a glue. And now we're going to make some teardrops. Obviously I would need as many teardrops as I have wires, maybe a few spares. And my routine for making it is this. I make all of them at once and place them in order of making. So by the time my last teardrop is ready and made, my first teardrop is also just dry enough and ready to be placed on the wire and then to be shaped into the little center of the little flowers. So when I was just covering my routine for the middles, I forgot to mention that routine would not work for gum paste. With gum paste centers you have to place them on straight away, otherwise they would dry and crumble, and that would be the end of it. With cold porcelain in this case, drying it a little bit works to its advantage, because it stops being too soggy to place on the wire. It becomes more shapely, more firm. And at the same time, once the teardrop is on the wire and you are ready to cut it into segments for the finishing, you would find that segments fall into realistic middles much easier than if you would have worked with very fresh cold porcelain. I'm going to demonstrate it, and hopefully that would clarify what I'm trying to explain. So you see these little segments that I just cut the middle into. If your cold porcelain is a little bit drier, the segments just fall apart naturally and they're easier to shape. If your cold porcelain is a little bit on the soggy side, they probably would bend and sit unnaturally, and they would be also quite hard to work with. Now we're going to make the flowers that go around the actual middle, and I'm going to use this board for sizing, and I use size 6, or you could use the green board behind it to gauge your sizing if you don't have a measuring board. And to make the right number of balls, you could prepare them in tens, or what I do, I just pinch a bit of clay and I make enough balls that clay would make, and then I would store it really airtight. That's very important, because obviously the balls are quite small, so unless they're very airtight, they would dry. And back to our centers. Once they're all nicely shaped, you add craft glue to every little end of the middle, and then you dip it into the dust to try to make it look like pollen. If you look at the real flower, which I'm copying, you would see exactly what I mean. You can skip this step, but I think it makes it look more realistic. So here you go. I have enough centers for 2 flowers. It actually doesn't take very long to make the centers. The rest takes much longer, and that is a ready flower that we're going to be making and shaping now. So all of our flower cups are freeform. We don't need any cutters, which is great news, and actually the principle of making them follows the same route. First you make a teardrop out of ball size 6, and then you proceed to shape that teardrop into the little flower, and I'm going to show you how to do it now. So first thing you do, you flatten the tip of your teardrop to make it look like this, and then using either this tool, which is better, or a pointy cell pin, you could start shaping it into a dip, out of which you're going to cut your little petals in a minute. So those of you who've already seen my previous tutorial on filler flowers, you would already be familiar with this routine here. So what I'm trying to do, I take straight edge scissors and I divide this concave middle into 5 equal parts. I find that it really helps when all your petals are cut into the equal sizes, and then step by step you're going to slowly but surely turn it into the little realistic looking flower. Firstly, I give a rough shape and a rough positioning to all the petals with my Dresden tool, so that all the petals are sitting in the right place, and then I'm going to start to thin them and give them the more precise shape of the flower that I am following. For that I sometimes use metal tool like this one, but you can also continue to use your Dresden tool, which is very versatile. And if you find that your Dresden tool starts to stick to your cold porcelain a little bit, make sure you use enough dust to prevent that. Okay, and this is the shape that we're looking at. So try to keep all your petals within the flower the same shape. Cold porcelain is a stretchy medium, so as you thin it, also make sure that you pull it in the directions that you want to reach the shape that you want within the flower. So by the end of the thinning process, your petal becomes the shape that you want it to be and not just a thin petal. And this is roughly the shape that you are expecting to get from each of your free-form flower. And now I'm going to add a little bit of texture to the petals using my own self-made texturer. I made it out of a 2-part silicone putty, and it basically has a bit of texture on one side and easy to grip on the other side. But there are other tools you could make it with. The black texturing tool, I don't remember off the top of my head what's it called, or I'll just show you how to use a Dresden tool in a bit. So the profile, I'm going to show you what this flower should look roughly in the profile, how much to leave at the bottom. This is just for a little neck. Don't make this neck too long because it's just going to be harder to deal with. And as to the shading it, I am using dust because I don't think it would work as nicely with paint at all. Basically with paint you do need a bit of space to smoothen it out, to kind of swish it from place to place and smoothen it out. With dust on the other hand, only a little bit of dust and a little bit of space could create that kind of a nice smooth magic. And so the center goes in and you have a little bit of glue at the base of the center, and that should sit in right really nicely. So what did I make of this flower? I found that it was quite easy to make the flower itself with a bit of trial and error, but the center of it, the very middle, proved to be quite difficult to make so that it looks like the original I was copying. and it took me a few goes to do that. But eventually it got there, and I'm actually quite happy with the result. So here you go, and I hope that repeating it would be not so difficult for those of you who like to make filler flowers. And obviously you could use this as a part of a big crown or by themselves in a little single arrangement. So a bit of flower shaping here, and let's go through some troubleshooting. So if one of your petals is cut out to be too big, I suggest you cut it down to match the rest before you continue on. Otherwise it doesn't work, it just becomes quite hard to manage and messy. And yeah, this is a bit of a in focus how to start rounding these petals up. You kind of round them and push them in at the same time. That as opposed to pinch them, you have to push them in first. Hope that makes sense. And this is what you're looking at. And here I'm going to show you the profile. It's perfectly fine to cut down your base so that they pretty much uniform across all of your arrangement, because you'd be able to see your little flowers in profile as well as from the top. And yeah, if one of your petals is starting to fall off, just attach it back on. I mean, here they're quite dry by now because I fiddled with them for quite a long while. So just attach them, add a bit of glue and attach them to the top. So sometimes your flower could be blended back in with a brush with a bit of water on it. But if it's gone past that stage when it could be blended with water, just glue it on, smoothen it the best you can with your metal stick or a Dresden stick, and put the center in the middle. It would blend in very, very well with the rest of the flowers in the crown. You wouldn't even know that it's there. And here I'm just going to show you how to get rid of those little edges and ridges which are not very attractive. So just like this, one by one petal, you push it in and all the excess of clay finds itself in the middle of the flower. And yeah, that would make for neater flowers, even if it does take a little bit longer to make them. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to show you how to add a bit of texture to your flowers with a tool other than that blue thing I used. And here basically you just use any pointy tool. It's not even a Dresden tool and it still works, and it works quite well. So you leave a little bit more flesh on flowers if you want to add texture and see it show up, and voila, you're there really. So now we're going to make smaller flowers to put right in the middle of that arrangement. And what I'm trying to do here is I am trying to close my flower back in as if it hasn't opened yet. And yeah, there are shortcuts to this without actually having to make a flower and then fold it in. But personally, I am not very keen on those. I will show you what I mean in a minute. But now, to keep my flower closed and semi-dry as closed, I'm adding a little bit of a flower tape, just like so, and in about 10 minutes or so it will just stay how I want it. Now there is another way of making a middle and all those buds and little flowers and bells and whistles without actually spending a long time making a whole flower and then folding it in, which, you know, could seem as a bit of a bother really. So what you do is you do these little bends in your little dollop of clay, and then to mimic the flower that's folded in, and then you just add a bit of texture, you know, and hope for the best. I do find that it doesn't quite fit in with my style of flowers, at least, because it will just stand out as being unrealistic and a bit odd. But certainly if you go for more stylized or more commercial way of doing it, good for you, you know, why not? It's just about what fits together and what doesn't, I suppose. On the plus side, it's actually not all that long-winded and unfair and time-consuming, because as we go smaller, it stops making sense to reduce a whole flower, because we don't actually see a lot of these details in this very small buds of flowers. So you do your second size down like this, which is a lot quicker because not a lot of attention is required, and then you move on to actual little ball, which I think, you know, looks quite okay when it just goes right in the middle of the crown of flowers. Okay, I've nearly forgotten, but there was another flower in this whole arrangement that wasn't quite a bud, but it wasn't a fully open flower either. So I'm just going to kind of show you how to do this one as well, although it's, you know, quite self-explanatory. But basically I want to take a flower that's fully made and just slightly open it using the same flower tape technique as before. Here we go, and this is our little bunch. We're going to make it in a little crown in a bit, but yeah, this is the range from a very close ones to more open ones with slightly smaller ones thrown in. And for those of you who've not been to my YouTube channel before, this is what I do to add a bit of color to the white clay, white cold porcelain. And basically the idea is to add your color really sparingly. It applies more to petals rather than green stems or the clay for green stems, because green doesn't color very quickly as opposed to all other colors or most other colors. But yeah, add a bit of green, bearing in mind that your cold porcelain will go darker as it gets drier as opposed to lighter, which could be the case with gum paste. And once it's ready, add a bit of water to make it softer and tackier than you usually would have it, and then it would be ready for you to cover your mini stems of each individual flowers. Of course, you can just leave it because obviously the wire is green in itself, and if it's easier for you and you're totally sick of little white flowers all over the shop, then what I suggest you do is leave this stage out, assemble your flower and enjoy the result, and come back to it later. However, if you do want to persevere, this is how you cover your little stems with cold porcelain. This is the traditional way. So don't forget to add glue to the stem, and don't take too much clay, too much cold porcelain in your hand, and then you just apply it very thinly over the top of the wire while it's quite sticky and quite tacky. And don't forget to rotate your other hand to make sure that the clay goes on nice and evenly, and then you straighten it all out with water. Water in this case is magic. It does help you to remove loads and loads of little faults. But most of all, I suggest please don't expect a very nice, cute result straight away, because it's just not going to happen. It does take a lot of practice to get reasonably good at this stage, much as it doesn't seem very important or very prominent. So two important things. Each of these individual strands of flowers covered with cold porcelain, you would need to bend as smoothly as possible to look natural. Another thing, by the time you're done with covering your strands with cold porcelain, individual flower stems with cold porcelain, they would be all different lengths to accommodate how they would go into this umbrella. But make sure that you don't tape any of the strands that have cold porcelain on it with a tape. All of them need to be just wires to keep the thickness of the eventual stem to the minimum. I'm going to work on it to try and make it thinner than it is now, but basically the thinner you keep it, the better. And this is it. This is my filler flowers, my first attempt at something like this, and I am very pleased with it actually. I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you again next week.